Hey, hello, my friends. Hello. Yes, this is a different location for me to be doing a video, but I felt so compelled and I had such a fire lit under my butt this morning that I said, I can't wait till I get home. I got to do it now as soon as I can. So I have a little break at work here today, and I've got to get this video done. It all started this way this morning. I was having a very peaceful, enjoyable morning, relaxing morning, when all of a sudden I saw this video by my good friend Joe, Mean Mr. Mayo, on his channel this morning. And this video was about how this artist, I guess, I use that term loosely, this musical artist by the name of Drake apparently thinks he's shot over the Beatles. He's surpassed the Beatles in greatness. Okay, Joe's video was about this artist Drake and how he's gotten, he's somehow has bested the Beatles, or he's somehow his measurement of sales, or how many number ones he has, or top tens. I don't even know what exactly it was, but somehow this guy thinks he is somehow head and shoulders above the Beatles. Okay, something about a tattoo on his arm with Abbey Road, and he's in front of the Beatles on Abbey Road waving to them or flipping them off or whatever he's doing in the tattoo. I could care less. And so I said to myself, man, this is getting me fired up. I says, I am so sick of people over the decades, not years, decades, folks, have been trying to measure themselves against the Beatles. The Beatles are the signpost, and everybody's trying to see how they can relate to that Beatles signpost. Where do they fit in? Are they on top of it, below it, next to it, where they are? They've been doing this for years. I'm tired of it, and it's gotten to me so, it just irked me, okay? I'm sorry, I'm at a loss for words. I love Joe and his video, great video. This is not against Joe. This is against this artist Drake. And once again, we have another one who wants to think they're better than the Beatles. Okay, so let's go back in history a little bit. Let's go back in time, all right? I can go back as far as the early to mid 70s with the Bay City Rollers. Who remembers the Bay City Rollers, okay? They were going to be the next big thing. They were going to be better than the Beatles. They were going to surpass the Beatles. George Martin even wrote a little piece about them on his notes in the Abbey Road. I got Abbey Road on the brain. In his Hollywood Bowl album that was released in '77, about how his young daughter Lucy, I believe her name was at the time, was 9 years old, and said, "Dad, are the Bay City Rollers?" They were her favorite group. Are the Beatles as good as the Bay City Rollers? And I guess George Martin wrote a little anecdote in the story on the back of Hollywood Bowl saying, well, I told her, perhaps not, my dear, but someday she will find out. You know, it's one of those things. Where are the Bay City Rollers now? Now, let me preface this, folks, by saying I have nothing against any of the artists I'm about to mention, including the Bay City Rollers, and even in some way, including Drake. I have nothing against anybody in the music business who can have a moderate to successful career in music. It's very difficult. It's very hard to do. So anyone that has an ongoing career in music, I say more power to them. God bless them. I have nothing against them, okay? So let me say that first. I'm not putting any of these artists down. In fact, I love many of these artists. Bay City Rollers, I own an album and a CD by them, okay? How about Debbie Boone? Who remembers Debbie Boone from 1977 or so, and the song You Light Up My Life? And it was such a big deal back in '77 that Debbie Boone's song You Light Up My Life had 10 weeks straight at #1. And it was such a big deal in the media and the music media about how Debbie Boone was going to pass the Beatles because they had 9 weeks with Hey Jude at #1. So now You Light Up My Life was going to be bigger and better than that, and better than the Beatles record. Nothing against Debbie Boone, but folks, really? Okay. The Knack, all right? I love The Knack. You all know I love The Knack. I've made videos about The Knack. Their first LP was touted as being like the biggest selling debut on Capitol since you know who, the Beatles. And I've got nothing against The Knack. I love The Knack. I've made videos about them so many times, talked about them. But let's be honest, The Knack are not the Beatles, okay? How about the Bee Gees in the '70s? I love the Bee Gees. But remember when they put out Saturday Night Fever and a couple of their other albums around that time? And the big deal was how, wow, the Bee Gees have put out 6 songs in a row that made #1. They tied the Beatles record. The Beatles did the same thing. They had 6 #1s in a row or something like that. And that was the big deal. The Bee Gees, they could be the next Beatles. I love the Bee Gees, folks. Love them. Saw them in concert back in the 90s. Love them. Have many of their releases. Are they the Beatles? I think not, okay? Now, let's come into the 80s a little bit, all right? Oh, before we leave the 70s, what about ABBA? Who remembers ABBA, or ABBA, however you pronounce it? I'm from New England, ABBA, okay? Who remembers the ABBA? They were going to be the next Beatles. Do you remember that? And I love ABBA. I have a couple of their records. But did they ever become the next Beatles? I don't think so, all right? Let's come into the 80s now, the boy bands of the 80s. Remember all those boy bands in the 80s and early 90s? The first big one I remember is New Kids on the Block. Woohoo! Do you remember New Kids on the Block? They were selling out stadiums, folks. Selling records up the yin-yang, okay? They were touted as the next big thing, the next Beatles. And you get all these talking heads on the radio for these, you know, all these bands and different things like this happening going, well, so this generation, the New Kids on the Block are to this generation what the Beatles were to the youth of the 60s. Yeah, okay. And they show a bunch of screaming girls for New Kids on the Block, or maybe it was NSYNC or Backstreet Boys or whoever, or this is the Beatles to them. You know, these idiots on the media, you know, they need to pull their head out of there, you-know-what. They have no clue, okay? No clue whatsoever. Anyway, let's be honest, New Kids on the Block, NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, they didn't become the next Beatles, okay? All right? May she rest in peace, but remember Whitney Houston? She was having all these strings of #1s, and I think she might have been the one that broke that 6 #1 in a row record by the Beatles. I think she might have gotten 7 or something. I don't know all the statistics, but that was a big deal. Oh, Whitney Houston, she's going to beat the Beatles. She's going to beat, everyone's beating the Beatles, you know? And God bless Whitney Houston. Tragic what happened to her, but let's be honest, Whitney Houston didn't become the next Beatles, okay? Let's come up further. Let's come into the 90s and beyond a little bit. Remember Oasis? I love Oasis, folks. I have every release by Oasis. I love them. They're a great rock and roll band, all right? But even Oasis kind of was a little bit off their rocker, I think, when it was Liam Gallagher that said at one point, like, we're going to be as big as the Beatles. You know, he said in his Cockney accent, go be as big as the Beatles, whatever, however you say. And, you know, God bless Oasis. I love them, but they never became the Beatles, folks, okay? Albeit, I do love the band. I think they're underrated and they're great, okay? All right. How about Jonas Brothers? Remember them? They were going to be the next Beatles, folks. They were going to be the next Beatles. Enough said, all right? And I'll give you one last one. One Direction. I remember watching one of the Today shows. It might have been the Today Show on NBC once, years ago, when One Direction first came out. And it was a big deal. All the anchors, you know, Al Roker and Matt and all those clowns over there, they're making a big deal about how, oh, One Direction, they're the next Beatles. And in a short while, a double-decker British bus, red British bus, is going to pull up in front of Rockefeller Center. And One Direction, and it did, and One Direction came bouncing off this British double-decker bus, and all the girls were screaming, and everybody, and they were, oh, it's like the Beatles, they're from Britain, and they're jumping off the double-decker bus in the middle of Manhattan, and oh my goodness, they're going to be just like the Beatles. They're going to be bigger than the Beatles. What happened to One Direction, okay? You know, Harry Styles is off on his own now, and this one's doing whatever, and maybe Harry thinks he's going to be the next Elvis. Woo-hoo-hoo. Yeah, right, okay, sure, all right. All I have to say is, folks, is what are the legacies of all these artists? Think about it. And where are some of them now? And again, I'm not putting anybody down here, all right? I'm having a little fun, but it's laughable. It's ridiculous to think that anybody is going to be the next Beatles. I'm sorry, folks. They're not. It's not happening, okay? Not happening. Not in our lifetimes anyway, all right? And the other thing I want to mention is, let's go back in time. It's 1965. 1965. But technology is different then. Technology is like 50 years in advance back in 1965. So here we are in 1965. Okay, let's do the twist and the monkey and all that, the bat, Tootsie and all that stuff. Anyway, let me get back on point. So it's 1965, only here's what is existing in 1965. We have SoundScan, we have iTunes, we have Spotify, we have Pandora, we have streaming. Music is streaming in 1965. There's downloading in 1965, and there's other musical services that are available to everybody at your fingertips. All right. And Rubber Soul has just been released. Rubber Soul has just been released. Think about it, folks. Every song, and I'll go with the UK version, all 14 songs, I think there's 14 on there, all 14 songs would be clogging up the top 14 on the charts because everybody and their brother and sister would be downloading it and streaming it, and there'd be like 3 songs from the album that would hit number 1 at some point. It would sell in the gazillions. And think about all the Beatles catalog if all that stuff was existing back then. Every LP would have multiple top 40 hits, top 10 hits, number ones. What do the Beatles have? 20-something, 20 number ones? They'd have like 60, 80 number ones. Their whole catalog, well, maybe except for You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, and Revolution number 9. But the rest of the catalog would be in the top 200 at some point, or the top 40 even, or higher. Think about it, folks. You know, so shame on the media when this guy Drake touts himself as being some kind of superior to the Beatles, you know, with this little measly accomplishment he's done, or I don't even know what he's done. Someone tell me. I don't care. He's not the Beatles. He will never be the Beatles. It's a joke, and the media shouldn't tout it like it's some kind of great achievement. They should have the sense to look at it and say, with what's going on in today's, you know, market and with technology, obviously, you know, Drake is not the Beatles. But, you know, good luck to Drake, you know. I'm happy he's having some kind of moderate or mediocre success in the music business. Good luck to him, because someday his career is going to be over. And I'm sorry, in 50 years, there's not going to be any Drake conventions or Drake deluxe box sets and whatever, okay? Be real, okay, people? Let's get real here, Drake. You know, be honest with yourself. Man up here and be honest, and stop trying to play this game that we're better than the Beatles, or I'm going to somehow be better than the Beatles because I did this or I did that. Who cares? It's the Beatles. Forget it. The Beatles. That's it. They're number one. They're number one.